Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Jonsered 2050 chainsaw. The customer complaint said it's just not running right. It's bogging out. So this particular unit is designed with a series of wood cutting teeth connected in a loop, which is driven by a small 2-cycle engine. It's called a chainsaw. This one bogs bad. Can't get the loop spinning fast enough to cut any wood. Well, the fuel that he's got in here looks kind of dark. Not necessarily bad or old. Maybe it's the oil he's using. Maybe it's a little bit old. Giving it the sniff test. It should actually run on that, in my opinion. So let's take the filter out and see what that looks like. We're just going to fish it out of the tank. And it looks like it has some age to it, but it doesn't necessarily look like it's plugged up. I mean, it certainly could be, but it doesn't look that way. When I remove the filter and put a pressure tester on the line, I'll pump it up to 10 pounds and see if it holds pressure. And it does. That tells me that the fuel line is good. And the carburetor needle isn't bleeding off, or there isn't a leak in a gasket on the carburetor. So now that I've established a baseline for the fuel system, I like to look into the cylinder and make sure that there's no scoring going on in there. I'm not saying that the scoring would be the cause of the bad running, but if it is scored, that's an expensive job, and it might make or break whether or not this saw actually gets fixed. And this is an older saw. I'm not sure about parts availability. So the spark plug looks pretty new. I'd say the owner made an attempt to fix his problem by replacing the plug. That didn't work. But looking in the cylinder, the good news is it's clean and shiny in there. So one way or the other, we're going to get this saw going for the guy. Got our boot back on. What are we going to do? I'm thinking we should slap a filter on here, maybe put some fuel in it and see exactly how bad it is. That's what I'm thinking. Hopefully the guy in the video is thinking the same thing. Here we go. Shop mix, special sauce. I wrote that on the can so that they wouldn't grab my fuel can and send it out on rentals. Alright, we got shop gas in there. There's no primer bulb on here. So, you know, it might take a few pulls to get the fuel up into the carb. Who knows? Checking the bar oil tank. And even though I don't need bar oil in there to test run it, if I top off a fuel tank, I always top off the oil tank because I don't want anyone to run that full tank of fuel through there on an empty tank of oil. I mean, we are talking about a lot of residential customers who aren't familiar with chainsaw use. You know, they use them reacting to storm damage sometimes. They're not experienced. So I don't want to set them up, so to speak. Let's see what this thing sounds like. Well, I would say that engine doesn't have enough gumption to get that chain spinning fast enough to shorten any logs. His air filter is old, been washed a few times. It's not plugged up. Just going to blow a little schmutz out of here because I'm planning on taking the carburetor off of this thing. Now, as far as carburetor removal and installation, if there was a top 10 list of saws I didn't like pulling the carb off of, or that gave me grief, this would make the list. I'm not sure where it'd be on the list, but it'd definitely be on there. You know, maybe taking the handle or the fuel tank off would make this job easier. But that's not the path that I chose, so I fight it a little bit. I did get the 2 screws unthreaded, but I have to remove this bottom base screw in order to lift the air box up high enough to finish pulling them bolts out of there. So that took way too long. There is a gasket that dropped down between the carburetor and the insulation block. And this piece is kind of wedged in there, like not a lot of clearance. Still got the fuel line and the linkage on here. Finally got the air box out. And now what? What am I digging for? Oh, there's a throttle cable on this side and a fuel hose on the other side. I think here's my gasket. Just get in there with a scrunch or something and start poking at it. That usually works. Pried the fuel line off. Thought I was going to have to plug it. That didn't have to be plugged. Here's the throttle wire. It just doesn't want to pop out of there. Pain in the butt. I mean, look at this guy struggling. I don't think it's because I'm having a bad day. I think it's just the way this thing's designed. It's not real friendly. Alright, so we're going to set this thing up on our handy dandy carb stand. First I'm going to blow some schmutz off of it before I open it up, just to try and keep any extra dirt out of the carburetor. On this side we have a single screw holding a plate down. This is the fuel pump side of the carburetor. Micro screen is looking pretty good. I don't see any dirt buildup for sure, and I don't really see any, scum or evidence of water, anything like that. Looks pretty good. On this side of the carburetor we have the metering chamber, and this plate covers that. 2 screws holding it down. You'll notice that there's a hole in that plate. That's just to equalize atmospheric pressure. The diaphragm itself, it's not like, potato chip crisp or anything, but it is got some stretch marks in it and a little bit deformed. It certainly could be a contributing factor to our problem. I'm kind of leaning towards some blockage in this, in the high and the low speed jets on here. The color of the fuel, the way that the fuel filter looked, had a lot of brown staining on it. I just got the impression that, at least at some point, fuel had been sitting in this thing for a while. So you don't always see me do this, but when I see that kind of evidence, then I get into removing the high and the low speed needles and just blowing some carb cleaner through here. And it's just a matter of, blowing the pressure of the can isn't going to be a problem. As far as the air pressure goes, I'm not putting the hose right up against the holes there. I'm just kind of blowing the thing dry. And with it opened up like this, it's probably not an issue anyway. I almost lost the spring. But I just like to be careful. I don't want to dislodge a Welch plug or anything like that. So before I took those needles out, I turned them in, lightly seating them, and then counted how many turns it took to do that. And now when I put the needle back in, I'm lightly seating it, and then I'm backing it out that same amount of turns. So when we put this back together, we're going to be relatively close to where it was. That will help me, get it started right away and be kind of close to tune. And also maybe indicate whether or not anything I did in here was effective, which doesn't mean anything in the end as far as the customer is concerned. But as a tech, it's nice to know if you're wasting your time or not. You can take a look at a metering diaphragm and see what kind of condition it's in, and then replace it and see if the saw runs any different. Spending a Saturday afternoon opening up carbs and messing around like that, it's kind of a waste of time. But if you pay attention every time you're in a carb, that experience builds up, and eventually, I don't know, I guess it makes you a better tech once you can associate what you're seeing with what you're hearing when you're running it, and what the end results are. All right, we checked the metering lever height. We laid down the metering gasket and diaphragm, screwed the plate back on. On this side, we're laying down the pump, the fuel pump diaphragm and its gasket. Unfortunately, this kit didn't come with the brown Teflon diaphragm, which seems to be the better one. But we gotta run what we've rung, right? So the black one goes on there. I held the throttle open a little bit so that the idle stop screw wasn't interfering with me centering this plate before I put the screw in. So now I get to put it all back together. And you're going to see, there's a few edits in here, and I kind of jumped from putting that throttle wire on to putting the carb inside this air base. It'll jump around a little bit, and the reason for that is I kind of wanted to show you all the steps, but I didn't want to show you all the misery. I struggled. Just this particular design is not agreeable with me. I had a hard time getting it back together. There's nothing out of the ordinary or difficult about it. It's just the way every piece is laid out. It's a pain in the butt. So we do have the carburetor bolted down. I'm going to assume that the throttle wire is attached to the carburetor. And I've got my gasket in between the carb and the insulating diaphragm, making sure that the impulse hole was lined up properly. Here I'm pushing the fuel line back on the carburetor. And then we got one line hanging out there yet. And because there's no primer bulb on here, even though we can't see exactly what that line is, we have to assume it's a tank vent. Right there. Looks good. Looking back in the tank again because, my long-term memory is good. My short-term memory is getting kind of bad. But really, my short-term memory is getting kind of bad. So we've got fuel and oil in here. Let's see what it sounds like. That didn't sound so good, did it? Let's open up the high and the low speed, just maybe 1/8 of a turn. You know, I don't know if I got them back exactly where they were or what, so let's try it again. So 3 things I want to point out. The first time I started it there and it died out, you know, maybe it didn't fully have the carb primed up and it bogged out. But it ran kind of long enough, it probably should have. The other thing is that 1/8 of a turn on each screw made a huge difference, didn't it? And then the third thing, and what we're investigating now, is that you may have noticed it was squeaky. And we're going to dig into that squeaking sound right now. Usually that sound you heard is a dry clutch bearing. So we're going to pop this bar and chain off of here. We'll pop the clutch off of here. Get some schmutz out of here. And we're going to lubricate that bearing. So this saw's been fighting me the whole way, and the design of this clutch is such that the impact socket I use all the time that hardly ever comes off that gun, it's too thick a walled of socket to fit on this style clutch. So I used a snap-on 3/8 impact and it buzzed it off of there just fine. There's this little washer right here. It kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting to see that washer in there. So we got some just Husqvarna generic grease. If you lube the tip of a chainsaw bar, if you're lubricating that sprocket, you could use that same grease. I mean, the grease that you grease the sprocket with, you could grease the clutch bearing. So we've got the grease on the crankshaft, on the bearing. We put that little washer back in place. And then we'll just reassemble the drum, the clutch. Put a little grease inside here. It was kind of squeaky, you know, we want to get rid of that. There's our clutch. Pull the starter cord out just a little bit so when that clutch bottoms, it doesn't yank on that cord or catch any of the pawls or anything silly like that. Alright, so we've lubricated the clutch bearing. We're going to put this bar and chain back on here. And we're going to try and start it. And if that noise goes away, I'll eventually fine-tune this thing. So that's all I have for you on the Jonsered 2050 chainsaw that had a big bog. Thanks for watching. Later.